Welcome to today's Explainer. We're about to take a truly fascinating, multidisciplinary journey into one of the most iconic structures on the planet. But we aren't just looking at standard history today. We're going to completely transform how you see the Great Pyramid of Giza. We're taking it from a simple ancient tomb into a marvel of acoustic physics, radiological pathology, and cultural ideology. We are exploring the anatomy of dread. I lived through something which will leave a remembered record behind for all time. Never again would I repeat such an experiment. That is a chilling reflection from British philosopher Paul Bruton, who, back in the 1930s, spent a single night completely alone inside the king's chamber. And honestly, he wasn't the only one to experience this overwhelming terror. There's an enduring story that when Napoleon Bonaparte visited the pyramid in 1798, he emerged from the deep interior pale, shaking, and refusing to ever speak of what he saw inside, simply saying, "You'd never believe me." So here is our roadmap for today's explainer. 1. Night in the Great Pyramid. 2. Legends of King Sarid. 3. The mechanics of dread. 4. Anatomy of the Pharaoh's curse. And 5. Ideology and structural hazards. Let's dive right in. All right, starting off with Section 1, Night in the Great Pyramid, Esoteric Experiences in the King's Chamber. To really understand this dread, we first have to understand the physical reality of just entering the space. Past mystics like Brunton didn't use the original hidden entrance. Instead, they navigated the Robber's Tunnel. This was a jagged breach literally forced open by Caliph al-Mamun way back in 820 CE, using roaring fires and cold vinegar to crack those massive limestone blocks. So after climbing that steep, slippery tunnel, Brunton settled in absolute darkness beside a lidless red granite sarcophagus. As the hours passed, he reported that the room's deep stillness completely dissolved into this hostile, terrifying atmosphere. He felt a literal assault of malevolent entities and demonic apparitions, which eventually gave way to a vision of luminous high priests. According to Brunton, these figures plunged him into a death-like out-of-body coma, basically to teach him that the true secrets of the pyramid were hidden within his own mind. It was an experience that permanently transformed his life. Moving on to Section 2, Legends of King Sarid, the pre-flood arcs of wisdom. Long before 20th century mystics were seeking out these experiences, ancient and medieval peoples had their own explanations for the overwhelming dread found inside the pyramid. According to 10th century Arabic texts, roughly 300 years before the Great Biblical Flood, a king named Sarid had an apocalyptic dream of falling stars and the earth being completely submerged. So to save human knowledge, he commanded a massive 20-year project to build the pyramids as these giant watertight arcs. Artisans inscribed the world's accumulated wisdom on the walls and on emerald tablets, but to protect this knowledge, priests used blood sacrifices to bind powerful jinn or spirits to the structures, commanding them to inflict madness or sudden death on anyone who dared to breach the vaults. Which brings us to Section 3, the mechanics of dread, unlocking the physics behind the terror. So what if we swap out magical guardians and terrifying spiritual encounters for hard modern science? To understand the physical dread here, we really need to look at piezoelectricity. This is basically an electric charge that builds up in certain solid materials, specifically the quartz-rich red granite used in the pyramid's inner chambers whenever it's subjected to acoustic vibration or mechanical stress. Essentially, the massive granite blocks of the Great Pyramid act like a giant, highly resonant tuning fork. And this principle is absolutely crucial for understanding the modern alternative theories that view the pyramid as a massive acoustic power plant. When you look at the internal geometry of the pyramid, you realize it actually functions as a massive acoustic filter. Just trace how the sound travels. The Grand Gallery acts as a waveguide, amplifying low frequencies from vocal chanting. Then the antechamber acts as a physical bandpass filter, using these huge granite baffles to isolate pure harmonics. By the time that acoustic energy reaches the king's chamber, you're dealing with highly specific frequencies like 111 and 117 Hz. All the while, the entire structure is oscillating with the Earth's natural infrasonic hum at 2.0 to 2.6 Hz. Think about what happens to a human body in that kind of environment. If you lie inside that acoustically coupled granite sarcophagus, you are immediately subjected to a barrage of infrasonic physical vibrations and piezoelectric static charges. This extreme sensory mismatch and electromagnetic distortion can actually physically trigger localized seizures in your brain's temporal lobes. The result? Overwhelming paranoia, a severe sense of impending doom, and vivid, terrifying hallucinations. Science actually shows us that the demons experienced by people like Paul Brunton are physically generated by the architecture itself. Let's pivot to Section 4, Anatomy of the Pharaoh's Curse, a clinical reappraisal of the deadly vaults. Now, the psychological dread is incredibly real for sure, but so are the physical dangers. For decades, pop culture has blamed the pharaoh's curse on supernatural spells and vengeful jinn punishing intruders. However, modern epidemiological studies of field Egyptologists reveal a much more terrifying biological reality. The curse is actually the result of breaching hermetically sealed vaults that have been accumulating heavy, radioactive alpha emitters and highly toxic fungal spores for thousands of years. The clinical progression of these hazards is honestly gruesome. The granite bedrock decays and releases radion-222 gas, which gets trapped in these unventilated chambers at incredibly toxic levels. That leads to radiation sickness, hematopoietic cancers, and rapid wasting. Add to that ancient dormant soil fungi like Aspergillus fumigatus and Aspergillus flavus, which thrive on decaying organic matter like linen. When you inhale those spores, they can cause chronic lung damage and invasive infections where victims literally cough up blood and black pus. This perfectly explains why so many early archaeologists suffered from rapid wasting and fatal illnesses right after opening these tombs. Finally, Section 5, Ideology and Structural Hazards. Pharaonism and the deadly ascent. Shifting our focus from the pyramid's interior to its exterior, we find massive sociopolitical impacts. The pyramids actually birthed an Egyptian nationalist ideology in the 1920s and 30s known as Pharaonianism. Championed by intellectuals like Taha Hussein, Pharaonism argued for a continuous national identity linking modern Egypt all the way back to ancient Egypt. It was used as a tool to forge a very distinct geographic identity, specifically emphasizing these ancient roots over broader Arab or Islamic ties. But as you might expect, this ideology is highly contested. Nationalist and Coptic Christian views celebrate this deep pre-Islamic heritage as a major source of national pride, with Copts sometimes claiming a pure link to ancient Egyptian culture. Conversely, Islamic critiques, voiced heavily by figures like Hassan al-Banna, view the glorification of pharaohs as celebrating pagan jahiliyyah and ancient tyranny. They argue that it directly contradicts the Quran and undermines Egypt's modern Islamic identity. Now, we're just explaining the source material here and not taking sides, but it's fascinating to see how powerful a cultural symbol the pyramid remains today. Now, moving from cultural hazards back to physical ones, 1,600 plus. That is the staggering amount of lives lost to a 19th century sport known as pyramideering. This was the incredibly popular, yet wildly dangerous, practice of trying to climb the weathered 52-degree, 146-meter limestone precipice of the Great Pyramid. The monument just holds such an awe-inspiring and sometimes fatal psychological grip over people. Back in 1831, a young man named James Mays became completely obsessed with the structures. Upon finally reaching the summit, he committed the only recorded suicide by throwing himself off the dizzying heights of the pyramid. The sheer scale and ancient presence of the monument can simply overwhelm the human mind. Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought. We know the Great Pyramid is a clinical hazard of radiation and fungi. We know it represents a towering cultural battleground. And we know it is a literal masterclass in acoustic engineering. So under the influence of 117 Hz acoustic frequencies, causing your temporal lobe to misfire, combined with the deep 2 Hz infrasonic vibration of the Earth, what does an eternity locked inside that resonant stone truly feel like? It's a terrifying reality of ancient architecture that I'll leave you to ponder. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning what you think you know about the past.